Hello, Bill.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Yeah, well, I can't do this in the afternoon.
This
it's a whole
is
different world in the afternoon.
usually this is first thing in the morning. Matt is kind of bleary-eyed. He doesn't really have his A game, but I serve as your DMZ. Pick me up your morning jolt, brightening your day. Now your day's been brightened by some other trollop. Who knows who's in your business now? And I'm just
I've been seeing other commentators.
I'm just some kind of third wheel. But this is Wednesday afternoon. This is roughly 12 hours, 15 hours after the Tuesday night South Carolina debate. We are 4 days away from South Carolina, or 3 days. Can't do any math. And 6 days away from Super Tuesday. So, how do you think last night's debate is going to impact these critical contests?
I don't think it will. I think everyone did pretty well. I think the status quo remains. The one interesting thing is that Elizabeth Warren has had a couple of pretty good debate performances in a row. That doesn't seem to matter. Biden had a solid performance. That will help him going into South Carolina, but he was already kind of nursing a narrow lead there. So I don't think it changes anything. What do you think?
Well, I disagree. I think that...
Good. That's good TV.
I thought Biden had a B+ debate, which I think was good enough. One of his better ones. I mean, Biden needs to win South Carolina probably with a healthy margin, because he needs to not just win there, but really catapult into Super Tuesday and most likely sweep the South. So there was a lot of crossfire. There was a lot of focus on Bernie, a lot of focus on Bloomberg. No one really took a shot at Biden. It makes sense to go after Bernie. He's the national front runner, but Biden is the South Carolina front runner. And not even Steyer. I mean, Biden really wheeled on Steyer because Steyer's running second or third in South Carolina polling. And arguably, to the extent that Biden has sagged in South Carolina, it's Steyer that has benefited because he's got a big ad campaign there. And Steyer did not really return fire. Steyer didn't take a chunk out of Biden. So Biden has a shot at getting up off the mat and being the main competitor to Bernie on Super Tuesday, number one. Number two, how this affects Bernie, I think, is a little murkier. He had the incoming. No one delivered a knockout blow to Bernie, but there is a chance that just being the person with the target on his back, triggers in some folks, right, maybe he's not the best choice for the general election. There are weaknesses that have been raised here. I'm going to hold off before I jump on that bandwagon. He's not going to lose his diehards, of course.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going to...
Bloomberg has probably been... I would say Bloomberg has actually probably been the most effective at explicitly pointing out Sanders' potential weakness in a general election.
Right, so that's why even though Bloomberg probably is not helping himself all that much, it wasn't a great debate for him, even though it was better than the disaster the week before. I doubt it's enough to get him over 15% in a lot of places. I can't rule out the possibility, but I'm not counting on it. But just he's the closest thing to having a Trump on that stage say the things that would be said in a general election. Does that make people pause? Yeah. I don't know, and I'm not going to get that data probably before Super Tuesday. There's only so many polls that are going to happen between now and then. Is it going to really process what happened in the debate? I don't know. One other thing. So I'm
a believer in the ads. Let me just say this. A lot of people poo-poo the power of these TV ads. I'm a believer in the ads, and I'm a little more bullish probably on Bloomberg's performance on Super Tuesday, which I think probably helps Bernie, actually.
Yes. I mean, that's a legit X factor. Yeah. Biden is not spending in the Super Tuesday states, clearly is hurting for cash. And does that hurt the ability for him to translate a South Carolina victory into a broader Super Tuesday score? Totally valid point. The Warren factor is also murky because she's had, two good debates. I think this one probably not quite as good as last week, not quite as dominant. But is it enough that she keeps herself? She's not going to win maybe any states. She could win her home state of Massachusetts, and that's not even in the bag. She's probably not going to win anywhere else. But if she is over 15% in a lot of places, she's getting delegates. She's possibly holding Bernie down, and that Bernie is not getting as broad a bandwagon effect as he would like. And if that is, as much as Bloomberg might hurt Bernie, Warren hitting Bloomberg might help Biden, and the accumulation of those effects might mean more of a chance of a contested convention as opposed to a Bernie blowout on Super Tuesday, which, mind you, I'm not discounting at all. If I just take the most recent California polling on face value, Bernie might really knock it out of the park in California alone, and that might be too much for even a good Biden performance in the South to handle. And this is sort of the collective action problem, where it's not that Bernie is going to win 50%, but there's so many candidates who are still in the race. They're not getting out between now and Super Tuesday. They have every incentive to stay in, and they're going to get a chunk of the vote. And that means that if Bernie gets like 30% or something, he could, end up running the table. Well, I think he probably needs to do better than just 30. Certainly, I mean, in California, he probably needs to get in the upper 30s, assuming you have the log jam below him. The only way that doesn't happen, in my opinion, I think most likely it requires Biden consolidating the middle coming off of South Carolina, where he is getting not just winning the South, but cracking 20% in California.
You're saying, I just want to be clear. You're saying the only way to stop Bernie is for Biden to consolidate the center.
Right. I mean, I don't think Bloomberg can consolidate the center. It may be he does relatively well because of the ad campaign, but he's not going to be the moderate based on that alone, because unless there's some unsurprising Biden flame out in South Carolina. But everything we saw today in the last couple of days is Biden clearing 30%, double-digit leads in South Carolina. I don't see how you could have a Biden-Bloomberg split on the moderate lane on Super Tuesday. You're not going to see a Bloomberg dominance unless, of course, the ads mean much more than all this other stuff. But since the ads are not dovetailing with a lot of good Bloomberg free media, the Bloomberg free media is pretty bad, and he's not going to be in the South Carolina story, I don't see that happening.
So, it's my latest piece in the Daily Beast is partly about how it's so, even though only 3% or something of the votes have been cast so far, of the delegates have been allocated so far, we are starting to get to a point where Bernie could be unstoppable. And what's the Yogi Berra line? It gets laid early out there. In a week from today, Bill Scher, this could be essentially a fait accompli.
Well, I don't know if you saw, I posted on Twitter earlier this morning, I did some rough delegate math. There's a great primary delegate calculator at 270towin.com. And so you punch in the percentages for all the states, it spits out the delegate allocations. And so I sketched out a couple of what I would think would be best case Biden scenarios. Biden's winning South Carolina handily, and that's translating into Southern wins across the board. So I did a scenario where Biden's winning South Carolina by 15, 40 to 25, Bernie getting the 25. Nobody else getting over 15. And I did one where it's 30 Biden, 20 Bernie, 15 Ward in South Carolina. And I grant you that's very high for Ward in South Carolina. But the point was, I want to see what it looks like if Warren's getting to 15. How does it impact the race generally? And so I'm taking that those two South Carolina scenarios and translating it into Super Tuesday. So it's the same 40-25 divide in the southern states for Biden, and it's also 40-25 for Bernie in California, Colorado, and Maine, and Utah. And then I mix it up. I give Bernie a 1-point lead in Massachusetts with Warren right behind. I give Klobuchar a 5-point win in Minnesota. Bernie wins all of Vermont. And then for the other scenario, it's the 30-20-15. Biden's winning the South, 30-20 over Bernie. Bernie's winning his states, 30-20. Warren's getting 15 across the board. Same tweaks for the home states, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Vermont. So again, I think that's very high water for Biden. That means Biden is consolidating the middle. Bloomberg and Buttigieg and Klobuchar are not getting anything outside of Klobuchar in her home state. In those scenarios, Bernie still gets more delegates. Not a ton. In the 40-25, it's Bernie 679, Biden 642. In the 30-20-15 scenario, it's Bernie 514, Biden 488, Warren 285. Now, in these two scenarios, Biden's getting a good chunk of California. It is a net 91 delegate margin for Bernie in California. In the better one, it's a net 47 delegate margin. In the smaller one, with Warren getting a share. If that's not the case, even if Biden's doing well in the South, but Bernie's racking up a much bigger delegate margin in California, well over 100 net delegates with Biden getting nothing, that's a much different picture. Now, it may be we don't know the California margin right away because it's going to get called late. It's on the West Coast. There's a lot of mail voting, so it's going to take days to actually get a full count. Whereas Biden might win Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina. If he's doing well, he wins those early. That's setting a narrative. And Texas, I have Biden winning Texas here by, 10, 15 points. What if that's even bigger?
Have you seen, I saw on Twitter today that if Bloomberg is in the race, Biden in Texas, Biden is just narrowly winning. And if you take Bloomberg out, Biden wins Texas easily.
Right. So that's why this Bloomberg factor matters greatly. Is he going to hold on to his piece, or is he going to just totally fade by that point? Have
you tweeted these maps out? I'm very curious.
I did a tweet storm with the basic numbers. Yes.
All right. I need to encourage people to check that out because that's super interesting.
But and of course, there are obviously huge wide ranges. There are huge wide ranges here between this is my high water Biden, there could be low water Biden, maybe Buttigieg is getting 15 some places. There's all sorts of ways.
Let me ask you this: is there a scenario where Biden? Is there? Of course, there's a scenario, but is there a realistic scenario where Joe Biden? We end this election or this campaign with Biden having the most delegates?
Well, I haven't done the math, past Super Tuesday, but if it was relatively narrow, a Bernie lead on Super Tuesday, I would think you'd have a narrative shift that Biden's on the comeback, Biden's still in this thing, and there are more southern states to go. There's not a lot of deep South. On Super Tuesday, and those are the most dominant by African-American voters, the most like South Carolina, so you would think Biden would do well there. But I haven't looked at the rest of the map and how that would all shake out. At minimum, it keeps going. And I think even if it came out that, this was the case with Hillary and Bernie, she had not the biggest margin for Super Tuesday, but you could see the math gets harder and harder for Bernie every step of the way, and people will keep saying, look, guys, he can't overtake Hillary, give it up. And they would say, I'm not going to give it up. Don't tell me it's over. Anything can happen. What if the poll numbers change? What if it looks like Hillary's a sure loser against the Republican nominee? Maybe the superdelegates will make a different decision at the convention. Same here. If Bernie starts looking less like a juggernaut, and he starts getting more and more negative coverage. Right now, the trial heats with Biden and Bernie versus Trump are fairly similar. What if that changes? That's reason to keep it going and make an argument that a narrow plurality Bernie win does not guarantee him the nomination, does not deserve a coronation.
How much of this, though, is... I've frequently on this show, I've compared 2016 Republicans to 2020 Democrats. But, there are things in common, including the sort of tragedy of the commons game theory problem that the non-Bernie candidates now have. But what about just the zeitgeist? For some reason, we live in a world now where, the parties aren't just statutorily impotent, but they are out of touch. We live in it's an anti-establishment moment. It is a moment for disruptors. The world, it seems like the Bernie Sanders being this anti-establishment guy is more in line with the ethos of the day.
Well, I think that is, potentially true if you're not judging, if ethos is not majority. We don't have great evidence that Bernie reflects the majority of the Democratic Party. It may be with a plurality that enough is left over of people who say, I don't hate Bernie. I generally agree with him on things. I'm not with him on every last thing, but I'm not going to dig in my heels and try to take this away from him. And then you can get him, and he could get a majority that way. And it may be that translates into the general election. He's got a faction of his support, which is pure revolution, and a faction that's like, you're better than Trump. I'll see where this goes. But the ethos you're talking about, I think, sort of rests on that dynamic. Not that everybody is anti-establishment, but the energy, the factional energies with the anti-establishment, and those in the middle acquiesce to that. That is certainly a possible scenario here.
And it may be that there's a flaw in our system, or just a propensity in our system to reward the people that have the most intense followers. Bruce Mehlman tweeted something the other day about how movements beat campaigns. And, again, it's deja vu all over again with Trump in 2020.
Well, the thing is,
and you can say with Obama, same thing with Obama to a certain degree.
The constitutional structure of our government does not reward the faction. It is explicitly designed to prevent one faction from dominating the rest. So it may be, as we have small d democratized our primary systems, that's easier for a factional candidate to become the nominee. And if you have two parties with factional nominees, one of them gets to be president. But that does not automatically translate to that factional president governing in a very easy manner. So as much as, and I think I said this on your podcast earlier this week, as well it may be that Bernie is winning the primary, I do not think he is winning the argument, both within the Democratic Party and nationally. He may well become the president of the United States, but there are some very serious governing challenges that will await him if that's the case.
Well, and one of my concerns is, and by the way, people should go listen to this discussion we had on my podcast earlier in the week, where we got into the long-term dangers of Bernie Sanders and normalizing socialism, and the fact that Bernie could actually end up governing sort of mainstream, but you could have an AOC down the road who kind of carries the ball. into the future, that socialist utopian future. But look, I will say one of the dangers of Donald Trump is I think he has taught other authoritarians how to do it. I mean, I'm sure that if I were about to become elected president and I didn't particularly want to be reined in by norms or institutions, I would probably study some of the things Donald Trump has done. And I'm not just talking about, executive orders. There's a lot of things that presidents in the past didn't do out of either deference to tradition or institutions, or frankly, because they feared a backlash, that there would be some public opinion or elites that would stop them. And Trump did it and nothing happened. So I worry about a guy who has radical political views coming into a post-Trump era presidency.
I mean, I don't want to start sketching out very hysterical scenarios about what a President Sanders administration is going to be like. I don't think we know. We don't know how much he would adapt to constitutional constraints, or how much would he try to, push against those constraints, or even cross past those constraints. Getting
rid of the filibuster would be an obvious move, and that's not just Bernie. I mean, that's like, I think Elizabeth Warren is probably championing that more than anybody.
Well, I mean, and Warren is trying to use this against Bernie. I'm for eliminating the filibuster, and you're not. You're too much of an institutionalist. I'm ready to get some stuff done here. Now, in fairness to Bernie, just to take folks at their words, what he has said is, I'm not for eliminating the filibuster because I think that could be used against us down the line. I would pass single-payer health care and some other measures through budget reconciliation, and I am prepared to overrule or ask Democrats in the Senate to overrule the parliamentarian of the Senate if they try to rule out certain provisions in the bill as being not germane. Now, his defenders would say that's basically the same thing as limiting the filibuster, just through a different procedural means. It's still trying to govern in a majoritarian way and not a supermajoritarian way.
Yeah. By the way, you and I, a decade ago or maybe 8 years ago, I think we did not a whole show, but like a third of a show on the filibuster. And I was very much defending the filibuster. But Ezra Klein and his podcast has been making a pretty interesting point about all, the last decade of our politics has been a lot of frustration. People get elected, they're promised the moon, and then they elect somebody and that person can't get something done, and that leads to frustration, which leads to maybe even a backlash. And also people can just say, well, we didn't fail. Our program didn't fail. We never actually got to implement it. And so this next election is what really counts, because we just need to have 60 senators. And so you're never really you're never satisfying your desire to win. Even if you win, it doesn't feel like a win. But we're also not able to test the efficacy of things, right? Because you never actually get the chance to implement your program. So I'm not saying I've changed my mind completely, but I found that to be a persuasive argument for getting rid of, and as we conceded many years ago, it's not in the Constitution.
An argument for getting rid of the filibuster?
Yes.
See, I would take that premise and go the other way. My big concern going forward is that if we get rid of the supermajoritarian elements of our system, which I grant you, filibusters in the Constitution, but
and it's changed too. The number, the requirements have changed.
But the spirit of the Constitution is to prevent tyranny of the majority. That is the reason why you have the Senate. That's the reason why you have Electoral College. So filibuster is in that same spirit. And if we erode that, you might get your program implemented today, but it's very easy to uproot it tomorrow. Because that backlash, that pendulum can swing very wildly election to election.
Right.
I mean, if we go from Obama to Trump to Sanders, that's some very big zigzagging we're doing as a country. And that pendulum swing could happen very easily again 2 to 4 years later. We don't even know. I mean, Bernie might not get to implement his program. He might fight with the Senate. He might not have the Senate. He might have a Republican Senate. He might fight with them, get bupkis, and get an even bigger Republican Congress in 2022. And we're just stuck in the mud, or he can get it done, have the backlash in 2024, and the next Republican president wipes the slate clean. And you now never know, like, what system am I in? What are the rules? Right. How do I?
You're making like a Burkean conservative argument for evolution and reform, slow reform, but not radical change. And that's one that I'm very sympathetic to, and I certainly support things like the Electoral College, although I think they need to go back to the days when the electors actually were freed to vet candidates and to vote their conscience, and that might have stopped Donald Trump. But I have to say, the last decade, I think Ezra, again, I'm not saying he has persuaded me, but I do find it to be an interesting argument that at least we could test something and say, like, that worked or that didn't work.
But that happened with Obama. Look, that happened with Bill Clinton. Implemented a lot of his program. George W. implemented a lot of his program. Barack Obama implemented a lot of his program. We had 8 years of Obama. I mean, the fact that the Electoral College didn't agree with my view of the matter, notwithstanding, like, it improved the economy, it expanded healthcare, we were cutting carbon emissions, Wall Street was being more regulated. Like, it was not 8 years of stagnation. Stuff was in the works. Now, you're never going to implement your program on a dime. That is just fundamentally not realistic. But he had a 2-term presidency where he got a lot of stuff going. And I don't...
Ezra Klein, who has a book out, should come on. And I will give up the Matt Lewis seat for a week, and he could come on and debate you about this, about the filibuster.
I mean, I think the biggest frustration with the filibuster, and what I think animates a lot of leftist and progressive animus towards it, is climate change. Climate change is a classic policy conundrum where the urgency to act is removed from the urgency of the impact of the problem. So by the time things are bad enough that would normally provoke a democratic system to act, it's too late. And so to have to get a supermajority to do anything on the subject is seemingly a too high a bar to clear, where, like, literally the plan is on the line. So I totally get that concern. What I think counters that is, if you get your climate program implemented on a majoritarian basis, it might be gone 4 years later, and you've also not done anything about the climate. You need to have a broad consensus for policies to stay baked in, locked in, actually implemented over a long-term basis.
Maybe. I will say, Donald Trump loves overturning Obama's stuff. But a lot of these politicians, just look at the debate last night. Will you move the cap? Will you move the diplomats and from to Tel Aviv or whatever? Like, will you change the capital of Israel? I mean, even Bloomberg. There wasn't a single person. Even Bernie wouldn't commit. Bernie wouldn't commit to doing that.
I mean.
So once a precedent has been established, yes, they're loath to revert.
That can happen. I don't dispute that that's a possibility. I mean, look, Obamacare is still in the books. They weren't able to repeal it. They didn't have there probably wasn't unified enough. They're trying to sabotage in other ways. But, Republican governors are starting to say, okay, I'll take some Medicare expansion money. If you let me tweak it and kind of make it in my mold, I'll do it. If your policy is good enough, people will acquiesce to it or make it work for them. But since the possibility of very rapid political shifts may be occurring here, where you're going from, right-wing nativist populism potentially to democratic socialism. I'm not sure, I'm not confident that certainly the really big ideas that Bernie is talking about can get locked in well enough that people are comfortable with them. I mentioned this on the show in past times. This happened in Australia. They had a carbon tax. The Labour Party implemented a carbon tax. The Liberal Party, which is the Conservatives there, they campaigned against it. They won as their top promise, and they implemented that promise and repealed it. It was barely a year in before it was gone. So it's not unforeseeable that that could happen with single payer or happen. I mean, with Obamacare, that got embedded well enough that it's hard to unravel. And then so the insurance industry would freak out and say, "Whoa, don't do this. This is going to hurt us in so many ways." And enough Republicans flinched. I mean, Bernie even says this will be a 4-year transition. I mean, that's sure. Optimistic to do a 4-year transition of 1/6 of your entire economy. Who knows if we actually can do it in one term, and it might just get unplugged before it even gets going.
But going back to the 2016 analogy, I remember a lot of. Well, first I remember a lot of. Well, there's only 5% of the votes been cast. It's too soon. Trump will still be stopped. And then I remember. He's going to have all these other people checking him. He's not going to be able to implement his policy. He'll have people reining him in, and he'll mature, and yada yada yada. So I mean, I'm a little bit concerned, and I do think the criticisms of Bernie and the ads against Bernie being put out, and the interviews on 60 Minutes, where he praises Fidel Castro. And communists and things like that. I would not be surprised if a lot of people who really don't like Trump end up voting for Trump because of Bernie. Like if Bernie's the nominee, there's going to be I've not talked to my mom yet, Bill. Goes to see her this weekend.
Bernie would probably be a tough bridge for her to cross, I would imagine.
But I suspect, and she's in Pennsylvania. Maybe Bernie pushes her back into Trump's arms. There's probably a lot of people around the country like that.
If it's Bernie, if Bernie locks it up by Super Tuesday, is that enough time for another billionaire centrist to come in and say, we can't have this be a choice between a socialist and a racist. We need a third option. Full steam ahead, getting on the ballot right away. I'm going to give you another choice. I mean, I don't know who that person is going to be. There's obviously no chatter about that right now. But Perot started talking about running in February, and by June was leading in polls. So I don't totally discount that being something that could surprise us.
You see what I'm saying here? I hope that Perot. I hope Perot comes back because I have to tell you,
he's dead. He's dead.
Oh, I shouldn't be making fun of him. I have to tell you that when you do speeches, as I do sometimes this campaign season, if you can do, I mean, I'm not a good impersonator, but
I don't know. This is pretty good.
During the Clinton era, if you can drop an impersonation, then you're gold. And I can't really do a Trump, but I could do if there were someone, I guess Ross can't come back, but if there were someone that I could do, please run. Bill Clinton.
But to go to your other point, though, your point that it's not that this notion that it's only been 5% of the vote, and people had those sentiments with Trump, and Trump's ceiling was never as low as people thought it was. That could totally happen with Bernie, absolutely, and it could lead him to the White House as it did with Trump. But Trump is constrained by the Constitution as much as he tries to act like it doesn't. He gets overturned by the courts. He does not get much legislation passed. Now, there are things he can do on the global stage where he is more unconstrained, and I think those things have been extremely bad. But there's a certain amount of sentiment amongst Democrats that Bernie won't govern the way he campaigns because he'll be operating under those constraints. And that may well be true. Foreign policy is not one of those areas. I mean, even though Bernie says himself that presidents should be constrained by the War Powers Act, as I wrote in my piece back in June, he has made exceptions for that before in terms of using military force to stop genocide. So you can't even know if that's going to be constraining for him there. So
the thing, too, is even though Bernie has a radical revolutionary political philosophy, he has essentially existed within the infrastructure of our political system, unlike Trump. So so Trump wasn't trained to sort of go through the proper channels, so to speak, right? So maybe Bernie is more inclined. I'm sort of trying to be optimistic here, but maybe Bernie's more inclined to be a normal politician despite his radical philosophy. And
there are arguments for that. He was a relatively pragmatic mayor of Burlington. He worked with Republicans. He worked with the business community. He has passed, he hasn't passed a ton of legislation, but he did pass the VA reform with John McCain. He has gotten various amendments into bills. He's not unaware of how the process works. What I think is an unknown is, does he choose to operate on that path as president, or has he so committed to the revolutionary view of social change that he has fed his own followers that he feels obligated to follow through with that and go big? I mean, when you ask Bernie, what are your priorities really going to be? What are the top three things you're really going to focus on? Every president's got to make choices here. What are you going to choose? He rejects that question every time. That's a false choice. We're going to do everything.
See, I could do a Bernie impersonation, but I fear that'd be politically incorrect for me to do. I don't know. Can I? Am I allowed to do the Larry?
I got. It depends how it sounds.
I feel like that's a doable one. I mean, I'm at heart a very cantankerous person myself. So let me ask you this, Bill Scher. This is wildly premature speculation, but what's the short list for Bernie's? What is the short list for a Bernie Veep at this point?
I mean, this sort of speaks to the unknown of how he wants to govern, because the VP pick is a signal towards that. Like with Biden, his VP pick is going to be seen as a potential 2024 nominee. So you might say, well, Bernie's got to balance the ticket. He's going to probably if he's the nominee, he's a plurality winner. There's still moderates out there in the party. He needs to bring the party together. He should find someone who is more in the middle to balance things out.
Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar.
But if he wants to signal to his followers, here's who I'm passing the torch to when I'm gone, then he can't really do that. And, I'm sure he would love it.
AOC's too young. Right?
She's too young.
AOC can't.
AOC would be of age in 2024, but not now. Now, maybe that's an argument for giving it to Warren as kind of next best thing, but she would be in her mid-70s in 2024. Could run then. Obviously, Biden's doing it, Bernie's doing it, Bloomberg's doing it. So maybe he doesn't want to set up a Warren AOC clash. There's Sherrod Brown, Tammy Baldwin, relatively progressive upper Midwesterners. Those are possibilities. I can't say I'm going off the top of my head, so I haven't fully thought this through. But I do think that is the challenge for him.
We had an hour-long pre-game on this question.
But I think
I'm astonished he would.
But I think that is the challenge he's going to be facing. I mean, some are going to say you need to have an African-American, you need to have a Latino. But is there an African-American Latino out there who he feels is close enough to him ideologically if he wants this to be the person he hands the baton to? Or does he want someone who would be seen as not the next standard bearer because what he really wants is it to be AOC in 2024?
Yeah. My money's on Elizabeth Warren.
Now, if you're Warren, you're not playing for VP. You're playing for AG or Treasury. VP, there's no power, and there's no guarantee you're going to be the nominee in 2024 or 2028. And by 2028, you're probably getting up there in age. AG.
Bernie had a heart attack. Bernie had a heart attack 3 months ago.
You could. I mean, you could. I'm sure that's what people thought with Joe Biden, and look where he is now. So you might take it thinking I'll be president in my upper 70s. I suspect, I don't think Warren really wants to be commander in chief. I don't think she cares that much about that part of the job. She wants to push Wall Street regulations, and she wants to lock up some bankers. Those things that drive her more than anything else, and she can do that as AG or Treasury. And if you're AG, that's the most independent cabinet position around. She's not a number two kind of person. She doesn't want to do what Bernie tells her to do. She wants to do what she wants to do. She can do that as AG.
I see Reagan Bush, Bernie Warren. She ends up becoming a great vice president.
But Reagan Bush is an ideological mismatch. That's not Bernie Warren.
That's true.
That's more Bernie Buttigieg.
We'll see. I could be totally wrong. I do think if AOC was a year older or whatever.
4 years older. She needs to be 4 years older.
She has to be that much. You have to be 35. How old is she?
She's 30.
Wow.
She turned 30 at the tail of 2019. So she will just turn 35 in 2024.
If she were eligible, I think she's obviously at the top of the list.
Yes.
But she's not. So
let me circle back to something else, though. What do you make of Bernie refusing to fully and thoroughly throw Fidel Castro under the bus? You would think this would be easy. It would be easy to say, look, I'm a democratic socialist. He was an authoritarian. He was a dictator. He was brutal to his political opponents. I want nothing to do with that. The Cuban economy is a shambles. My version of democratic socialism is Scandinavia. It's Denmark. It's Canada. It's not Cuba. It's not Venezuela. I mean, he said things like that in the past. It's not like I'm putting words in his mouth here. But he can't seem just to fully shake Fidel Castro. He always has to make some kind of qualifier with him. And why do you think that is?
Because deep down he believes it. I think this is, so I had a very controversial tweet this week where I said, when Donald Trump took over the Republican Party, first it happened, it was a realization that happened in stages, but he won the Republican primary, took over the Republican Party, he became the president, and then people started acquiescing to him and bowing to him and sucking up to him. And it hit me over time. My whole life, people have been saying horrible things about Republicans and conservatives, things like, that they're racist, sexist, whatever. And I really dismissed it thinking, well, look, both sides have their fringe elements, of course, but I know a lot of conservatives and Republicans. I grew up in rural communities, and these are, good people. And once Trump really took over, it finally occurred to me that I was wrong. I'm not saying it's a majority, but there is a much more sizable contingent on the right of people who, at the very least, are tolerant and insensitive when it comes to racist things, and who harbor weird political ideologies. They're like monarchist, minarchist, freaking authoritarian tendencies out the wazoo. And I had basically thought that all the stuff Reagan said, which I think he believed, but which I believed represented the right, was not mainstream, and that actually Trump was tapping into some latent or not so latent tendencies. And so what I said, my tweet was that I said that if Bernie's able to take over the Democratic Party, just like some of the things that the left said about us, meaning the right, turned out to be more true. If Bernie takes over, I suspect it will mean some of the things we've been thinking and saying about the left all these years are true. And some of the things we've always thought about the left is that they're soft on communists, weak on the Soviet Union. Some of them were, dupes. Some of them were willing accomplices or fellow travelers. Long way of answering your question, but I believe that deep down, Bernie is actually actually a pretty authentic, honest guy. And he is being truthful. Like, he will not criticize Castro because deep down, in places he doesn't talk about at cocktail parties, he wants him on that wall. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, and there are other quotes. They haven't been recycled as much where he talks in his. If these are quotes from the '80s, where he talks about a feeling of excitement that Castro overthrew a horrible dictator who was helping the rich in Cuba, and that it was a victory for the common person. These aren't verbatim quotes here. So I mean, there always was a strain of romanticism about the Cuban Revolution on those grounds because he was replacing a bad guy, and he can't seem to fully shake that now. And this is why, I mean, I don't think this means that Bernie is an authoritarian. He is a self-avowed democratic socialist, and I take him at his word on that. But it does say to me that he is a socialist. There's an argument that Paul Krugman recently, put forth that I've heard other places that, Bernie's not really a socialist. He's not really a democratic socialist. It's European social democracy. He's not talking about mass public ownership of the economy. He's still going to retain the private sector. He's not making everybody literally having the exact same income. He just does this because it's sort of a branding thing. It makes him stand out. It tweaks the bourgeoisie, but it's not authentically what he actually is. And I think when you hear the Castro stuff, I think that cuts against that. Now, he's not going to bring about pure socialism on a 48-year timetable. It's not going to happen on his watch. But I do think this is a long game. He wants to move in that direction. He knows it's by hook and by crook. He knows he's got to pass the torch to AOC and hope that she can move the ball farther down the field. But he says the word. He refuses to give up democratic socialism as a label. He refuses to overly trash Fidel Castro because he wants to keep the democratic socialist flame alive beyond his time in office and this time on this earth.
Right, and I think that's a disqualifier. When you praise regimes and people who have gulags and who have destroyed an economy, and that's a deal breaker. I mean, that's a moral, that's a character thing. So to me, that's a deal breaker. It's inexcusable. Now, what Krugman said may be right. I hope it's right, but I think it's dangerous to impute to say like, well, when he says this, he doesn't really mean that. I think it's a dangerous thing to sort of say that politician X won't really do what he says or isn't really what he self-identifies as. And the notion that it's shtick reminds me of like the alt-right, and the game that they play where they'll say something anti-Semitic or just outrageous. And then if you're offended, they're just trolling you. It's just a joke, right? It's just a shtick. No, words mean things. Ideas have consequences. And I take it very seriously. And I think now we've reached the point of the program where I say that I could not vote for Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, obviously.
Now, to get back to what you said before about what would this mean about, is how you coming to terms with what folks said about the right is in many ways true. Would this now mean that what people say about the left is true? Now, it's going to be harder to argue, as I have and still do, that there are more moderates in the party, in the Democratic Party, than outright Democratic Socialists or even populist progressives. I still think the data shows that. And Bernie could win the nomination based on these factionalist plurality dynamics. You do see in what exit poll data we have so far, big generational splits still. Now, Bernie did better with older voters and in the same token moderates in Nevada than he did in New Hampshire and Iowa. it shows making some inroads, and possibly people, again, acquiescing to the guy with the hot hand. But you still see a really big drop-off between under 40 and over 40. The moderates and the older voters were very divided. So Bernie, I think if he either had a plurality or just under with over 65, but it's still, he's in the 20s versus being over 60% with folks under 40. I mean, it's a gulf. And so this is a whole generation of people who did not grow up in the Cold War, who are not immediately terrified by these words. And this is, we can't paint broad brushes here, but if you are a Chapo Trap House listener, I mean, they are sort of the...
we got lots of here. I think there's a big crossover. With our show
based on our comment threads, I think there actually is.
They hate Watch House.
They do.
They like the neoliberal shill that you are, Bill. They love that.
But in the Chapo Trap House book, they explicitly argue that the Soviet Union was no worse than America in the Cold War. That we both backed our dictators. We both abused human rights. We both killed people in wars. Who cares if they took over certain small countries? Pick your poison. So I think that argument is out there in a more robust way than maybe it was 30 years ago. I don't think it means that.
Scary.
I don't think it means that everybody on the left believes that way, let alone every Democrat or every liberal or every progressive. But that strain of thought exists within the movement here.
Man, I was just listening to a great podcast. It's about 7 years old. Russ Roberts, the economist who has this podcast called Econ Talk. And he did one, and I heard it when it came out, but I just went back and re-listened. And it's about Bukharin, who was one of the Soviet revolutionaries in 1917. and they go through, I think that he's interviewing an economist named, his last name is Gregory. And they go through and just if, Stalin essentially killed not just tens of millions of peasants by starving them, but basically killed anybody who might compete with him politically. It would be like if Trump just killed John Bolton or General Mattis and had them tried for if he was, Jim Acosta could literally tried for being an enemy of the people and executed. That would be the moral equivalent of. So I don't think that what America's had sins, of course, but what's the famous Bill Buckley line about doing the moral equivalence between America and the Soviet Union? And he said it's something to do with if a bus is hurtling toward an old woman and you try to save her and you push her out of the way, you're both guilty of pushing old ladies around, right? But pushing her in front of the bus, which what Stalin would do, is different than pushing her out of the way. So.
We should probably wrap things up. I want to ask you one last question. Can you vote in the Democratic primary in Virginia, and if so, will you?
That is a really good question. In Virginia, now see, I haven't voted in a while, so it's possible. It's possible that somehow my registration has elapsed, but assuming that that's not the case, I can tell you that my wife, for example, could certainly vote. The only thing that I think prohibits you is if sometimes there'll be a Republican convention where 5,000 people will go to Richmond or Roanoke or something and participate in that convention. And sometimes that happens before a primary. And so if you have participated in that process, you would be prohibited. But that's very few people.
And it's not you.
Otherwise, in Virginia, where I'm a resident, there is no registration. You just show up and you could vote a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot. And so I think you could make an argument, or I could make an argument, that although I would not vote for anybody in the general, that I should go vote, let's say, for Biden in the Virginia primary.
Do you if you can, will you do that?
I don't. I'm open to this.
I mean,
I'd like to hear from
you have 6 days. It's Tuesday.
Well, I got 6 days. I got 6 days to decide. Let me just ask you, Bill, as my friend and co-conspirator here. You know me. You know my moral objections and my stances. Do you think that would it be consistent with my values to vote or not to vote in this primary?
I mean, you seem absolutely horrified at the prospect of a Sanders presidency, so I would think it would make sense to vote for somebody who would prevent that possible outcome in a state where that would actually make a difference.
So you think it would be, and voting for Biden in the primary is not a tacit endorsement of his, let's say, like his support of pro-choice legislation or something. Should he win?
I don't think when you cast a vote, you are signing your name in blood to every single position that person takes. That's just not possible. And no one agrees with somebody on everything. You are making a decision of who is the best possible outcome with the choices that are available to me. Do you think? No, I'm an opinion columnist. I can tell you, when I worked at the Daily Caller, I always wrote a blog because I was a blogger, so I could write as much or as little as I wanted, basically. But I would always write a blog explaining my vote, just to be transparent, right? So, like, one year I voted for Ron Paul because literally like Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich didn't even make the Virginia primary ballot. They couldn't get on the ballot. So it was like Ron Paul versus Mitt Romney, and I voted for Ron Paul. Kind of as a protest vote, but I would always write a piece about it. I'm an opinion journalist, different from being a straight reporter. Is there like a conflict of interest, though, for me to vote, or at least should I tweet that I did it to be transparent? What do you think about that? I mean, I don't give an obligation. I'm not going to write about my vote. I want to keep my analysis separate from my vote. And in my mind, if that's, I mean, and mind you, I don't want to be duplicitous. I'm not trying to hide the ball. But once it's written on the record, I did X, then everything gets viewed through that prism. And in fact, I have to view things through that prism because it's on the record. I am freer to criticize the person I voted for, or at least judge that person's actions in a clinical light, because I don't have to then qualify it and say, well, I voted for this person too. You know, I can say, I'm functioning in my job as an analyst, and I'm analyzing to the best of my capacity. I try to be as transparent as I can about my opinions. I do it in this show, and I do it in my articles. But I just think it's fair to draw a line and say, look, my vote is my vote, and what I give to you publicly is my professional analysis.
But okay, so first of all, I think deep down, I agree with a lot of that, which is why I haven't voted as much, and I've been kind of happy not to have voted. But you asked me, essentially on video, you've asked me before, like, would I vote for this person? Will I vote? It sounds like you don't want to answer that question, though, on this show.
I don't want to answer that question. What's that?
I'm sorry. Would you tell us here who you're going to vote for?
No, I will not.
You will not.
I will not. I am not going to.
Don't you feel? I respect the sanctity of the ballot box. I would never, insinuate that you have a responsibility to tell us. But don't you feel a responsibility to tell us?
I do not. And look, I'm a pretty transparent guy. I don't like keeping secrets. I'm not the kind of guy who sort of enjoys having a little something to myself. I prefer talking and sharing my opinions. So I don't do that, lightly. But I do think in the position that I'm in, being an analyst publicly, I don't think it is conducive to that role to then be defined in that way, be defined by your vote. So.
But now I feel like I can't vote because. everybody now knows that if I vote, I'm going to vote for Biden, right? I mean, because Amy Klobuchar, I don't think will be relevant by Super Tuesday.
Here's the thing: if you want to vote strategically, and I'm a fan of voting strategically when you have good enough data to allow you to do so, and your primary goal is to deny Bernie from having delegates, you want to vote for whoever the person who has the best shot of beating Bernie in your particular state.
Yeah.
So you want to vote for Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota. You want to vote for Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts. Maybe it's Bloomberg. I don't know what the polling data is going to say. And what's complicated here is you're not going to get a rock solid poll because you're not going to be able to process Biden's victory in poll data between Saturday and Tuesday in a reliable way.
It just hit me. It's almost exactly 4 years ago the last time I voted in a presidential contest at all, right? Because I voted for Rubio in Virginia, and man, do I wish I had that vote back. I wouldn't vote for Rubio again, but I voted for Rubio.
But I'm sure you would have preferred President Rubio to President Trump, even knowing what you know now.
At the time, I would have been ecstatic, but I'm not.
He wouldn't have governed like Trump if he had won. He would govern like a conventional Republican.
I'm just numb inside, Bill.
Well, if you could do it again, would it be Jeb? Would it be Kasich? What would you have done? Would it be Christie?
You know what? Knowing what I know now, I think I would have been much more friendly to Jeb. Mm-hmm. I think that Jeb. Nobody has really. Nobody has come out of the Trump era looking great. But I would say that I was probably too hard on Jeb and much too positive about Rubio in hindsight.
So, one thing I'll say for Jeb's exchange with Trump, calling him the chaos candidate and he'll be a chaos president. He was right about that. That was the most on-point comment of the entire 2016 campaign.
He nailed that one. Well, now you've depressed me again. I started off. This was the opposite of what.
That's the problem with afternoon DMZs.
I think I'm over caffeinated. Is the problem? I've had like 10 cups of coffee. I'm gonna have to go hit the treadmill now.
Well, I guess when we talk next, it will be after Super Tuesday.
Wow. So that means 2 elections from now.
That's right.
Yeah. The whole damn world will be different by then.
It will. We'll look back on this day. This is our moment of innocence here before everything came crashing down.
We come back. We both look like Bernie Sanders. Will I have voted by then? That's really the cliffhanger.
If so, will you tell us who you voted for?
I will not. Based on your not doing it, I will not. Okay. But I will tell you if I voted, and you can draw your own conclusions.
All right. Well, till next week.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks.